The words were barely out before the room seemed to freeze. In this dramatized royal crisis, a court confirms that Prince Harry concealed a forbidden decree left by Queen Elizabeth II, keeping it outside the royal record when he had no lawful authority to do so. But the ruling is only half the explosion. Across the room, Princess Anne does not celebrate. She simply watches him, and Harry realizes the person he fears disappointing most has already understood everything. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Harry barely reacts when the judge finishes speaking. His eyes move instead toward Anne, seated only yards away, because her silence feels heavier than the ruling itself. The decree at the center of this fictional case was a restricted royal instruction, meaning a directive meant to remain sealed until a specific constitutional condition was met. That mattered because possession was never the same as ownership. Once the Queen died, the document was supposed to pass into the authorized royal archive, the system preserving sensitive sovereign records under custody. Anne does not look at him at first. She keeps her hands still, her expression tight, while Harry searches for some sign that she understands why he kept it. He finds none. When she finally turns, there is no triumph in her face. There is grief. That wounds him more deeply than anger could have, because he knows she had defended one principle above all others. Duty only means something when it becomes uncomfortable. The court then delivers the detail Harry had feared most. A sealed chronology, described through the documented account presented in the fictional proceedings, shows that he had more than one chance to return the decree quietly. One request came soon after Elizabeth's death, when palace officials asked whether any restricted material belonging to the late monarch remained in private hands. Harry did not surrender it. Later, another opportunity came with a direct warning that the paper required custody. He held it back. Harry lowers his head as the meaning settles in. Confusion can be forgiven. Delay can be explained. But repeated refusal creates something harder to escape: intent. Anne rises before he can reach her, turns without speaking, and leaves him behind. He watches the door close, realizing the legal judgment may be over, but the family reckoning has only begun. The judgment had exposed what Harry did, but to understand why Anne's silence cut so deeply, the story had to move beyond the court and into the complicated bond that once made him trust her judgment more than almost anyone else. Long before lawyers, sealed files, and accusations of concealment, Princess Anne occupied a strange place in Harry's life. She was never sentimental with him, never indulgent, and never easily impressed. That was precisely why her approval mattered. In this fictionalized story, Harry could endure criticism from newspapers, courtiers, even his father. But Anne was different. Her judgment carried the force of family memory, and now that judgment had turned painfully cold. Harry had always understood what made Anne difficult to ignore. She carried the discipline of Queen Elizabeth II's working life, the instinct that duty came before comfort and memory carried obligations. The crown, in plain terms, meant the monarchy as an institution rather than simply the person wearing it. Anne believed private pain could be real without becoming an excuse for abandoning responsibility, and Harry had once respected her precisely because she could separate those two things. Anne had warned him before. After a tense family gathering years earlier, she drew him aside for a private conversation recorded later in a fictional documented account, and told him that disagreement could be survived, but dishonesty destroyed trust. Harry laughed softly then, brushing the remark aside as one of her severe little lessons. Now the sentence returned with brutal clarity, because the woman who said it had just watched a court decide that he withheld something he should have surrendered. Harry sat alone after the ruling, with his phone in his hand. He typed Anne's name, began a message, deleted it, started again, and stopped. 3 times he tried. 3 times the words failed. He could explain anger. He could explain mistrust. What he could not explain was why the decree had remained hidden after he knew officials wanted it back, or why he had allowed Anne to believe nothing important remained outside custody. The decree itself made her disappointment sharper. It was not a ceremonial keepsake, but a restricted instruction, meaning a confidential directive intended to control how certain private royal wishes were handled after Elizabeth's death. That made its disappearance personal to Anne, who saw herself as a guardian of her mother's working principles. Months earlier, she had quietly asked Harry whether any sensitive material still remained with him. His answer had been careful, technically narrow, and incomplete. Anne now understood that conversation differently. Harry did too. What once sounded like caution now felt like concealment, and what once seemed like a family question had become the beginning of something far more dangerous. Anne's disappointment was painful enough, but the real rupture had begun much earlier. With one private encounter, one sealed envelope, and one decision Harry believed he could justify. Every royal crisis has a moment that later looks inevitable. This one had a date, a room, and a choice. Weeks after Queen Elizabeth II's death, Harry is confronted in this dramatized narrative with a sealed decree that should have entered controlled royal custody. Instead, after one explosive private conversation about its contents, he makes the decision that changes everything. He keeps it. Not for an hour, not overnight. He removes it from the chain entirely. Harry receives the decree only because it has temporarily remained among private family materials after an earlier handover. That narrow gap gives him access before the formal transfer is complete. Restricted royal papers, in this fictional account, are confidential documents that must be logged, transferred, and sealed after a sovereign dies, so no individual family member can control them. The process exists because private wishes can carry constitutional weight, and once custody begins, personal discretion effectively ends. Harry reaches Windsor expecting time, not confrontation. A senior palace custodian tells him the decree will be sealed immediately and unavailable to relatives once transferred. He asks for one night to understand what his grandmother intended. The custodian refuses. Harry presses again, saying Elizabeth's words cannot simply disappear into procedure, but the answer does not change. That refusal becomes the trigger. He feels shut out, dismissed, and suddenly convinced the machinery around the crown will preserve the paper while erasing the human meaning inside it. Harry reads one passage again and again. In his mind, it changes everything. The wording appears to touch a deeply personal family matter, and he believes surrendering the decree now could bury an intention the Queen wanted remembered. Anger overwhelms caution. Instead of challenging the process openly, requesting legal review, or demanding a formal interpretation, he chooses secrecy. He places the sealed decree among private effects, leaving Windsor, and says nothing. That decision feels temporary to Harry. It is not. The moment he removes the decree from the expected custody chain, he creates the very concealment the court will later condemn. Worse, the choice gives every later conversation a new danger. One wrong answer could turn possession into deception. For the first time, protecting his grandmother's meaning and protecting himself become tangled. He calls the silence temporary, yet every hour makes returning the decree harder, because explanation now requires admitting why he took it. Anne eventually provides that danger. Months later, she asks Harry directly whether anything belonging to the late Queen remains outside authorized custody. He already knows the truthful answer. Harry could still have corrected the mistake quietly. Instead, when Anne finally confronted him face to face, pride collided with duty, and neither of them walked away unchanged. There are no barristers in the room, no palace secretary, no carefully prepared statement. Just Princess Anne, Prince Harry, and a closed door. In the fictional drama, she has already pieced together enough to know something is wrong. She does not accuse him immediately. She gives him one opportunity to tell her himself. Harry hesitates, and in that hesitation, Anne realizes the truth before he says a word. Anne had arranged the meeting after finding a gap between the late Queen's private paper inventory and the material formally transferred into custody. That inventory, simply put, was the official record showing which sensitive papers existed and where each one was supposed to go. The missing entry mattered because it was not an ordinary family note. It was the forbidden decree Harry had taken, and Anne now knew the absence could no longer be explained as clerical confusion. Harry enters expecting a difficult family conversation, not an interrogation. He believes she wants reassurance. Instead, Anne asks one question. "Do you still have something that belonged to her?" Harry looks down before answering. The movement is small, but it tells her everything. His earlier answer had not been fully honest, and she feels the betrayal before he even begins defending himself. Harry insists he protected the Queen's intention rather than betrayed it. He tells Anne that surrendering the decree immediately would have buried its meaning inside procedure. She listens without interrupting, then answers with devastating calm. "Love," she tells him, "does not give anyone permission to decide which rules apply to them." Harry pushes back, saying the palace had already decided how Elizabeth's words would be controlled. Anne fires back that he had confused distrust with authority. The truth finally comes out. Harry admits the decree remains secured somewhere outside palace control, but he refuses to say where. He fears officials will seize it before its contents can be properly heard. Anne's restraint hardens. She tells him that enough evidence has already been gathered to seek legal recovery. What began as a private family failure is now moving toward the court, where intention will matter far less than possession and concealment. Anne gives him one final chance. "Return it voluntarily," she says, and there is still room to explain why he made the mistake. Harry remains silent. She understands that silence as a decision. Before he leaves, Anne delivers the warning that will later echo through the courtroom. If he forces others to recover the decree, he will lose the right to claim he was merely protecting it. Anne had given him his final private exit. Harry did not take it, and once the matter entered formal hands, control shifted away from the family completely. For all the emotional power surrounding the monarchy, there comes a point when bloodline stops mattering. In this dramatized crisis, that point arrives when the dispute is placed before the court. Harry may be the king's son and the late queen's grandson, but the question becomes brutally simple. Did he possess a restricted decree he was obliged to return? And did he knowingly keep it hidden? Royal status suddenly offers no shelter at all. Harry now faces a process that cares less about family loyalty than evidence. The fictional court is not being asked whether he loved Elizabeth, distrusted palace officials, or believed he was protecting her wishes. Its task is narrower: determine custody, concealment, and intent. Archival custody, in simple terms, means the formal system that controls where sensitive royal documents must be stored. Palace officials produce the transfer log, showing exactly when the decree should have entered that system, and where the chain suddenly breaks. Charles reads the court filing alone and says nothing. He sets it down slowly, already understanding the trap around him. If the king intervenes, even privately, he risks making the case look like one royal protecting another. If he stays silent, Harry will feel abandoned by his own father. That tension cuts deeply because Charles knows this is no longer only about a missing document. It is about whether the monarchy can apply rules to itself when the consequences become personal. Anne feels the same pressure, but reaches a harder conclusion. She refuses to ask for leniency, even though she knows a softer approach could spare Harry humiliation. To her, protecting him now would betray Elizabeth twice, first by ignoring the Queen's custodial instructions, then by treating family status as a reason to excuse disobedience. Harry understands that decision, but understanding it does not make it hurt less. The decisive evidence comes from Harry's earlier response to a custody inquiry. A documented account submitted within the fictional proceedings shows that he knew officials were actively searching for restricted material while the decree remained outside authorized control. That single detail weakens his strongest defense. He may have believed he was protecting meaning, but the court concludes that personal interpretation could not override a formal custody requirement. Harry hears the ruling and realizes the legal battle has ended. But something worse is beginning. Palace officials start removing him from every internal process connected to Elizabeth's private legacy, turning a courtroom defeat into a deeply personal exile. The court had answered the legal question. Now the family would answer the personal one, and those consequences arrived before Harry had even absorbed the judgment. Punishment inside a royal family does not always arrive with shouting. Sometimes it comes through silence, altered schedules, missing invitations, and doors that no longer open. Hours after the fictional ruling, Harry discovers that the consequences are already moving through the palace. His access to discussions surrounding Queen Elizabeth II's private legacy is suspended, and the message is unmistakable. Until trust is restored, he will no longer be treated as a guardian of her confidential memory. Harry receives the notice alone, and reads the same paragraph twice. His hand tightens before he lowers the page, because the loss is suddenly clear. A consultative role, in simple terms, is a position that allows someone to advise or contribute to sensitive family decisions without holding final authority. The palace has temporarily removed him from any such role involving restricted Elizabeth-era material. That matters because the punishment is not about rank. It is about whether the family still trusts him near the Queen's private legacy. Charles allows the decision to stand. The king knows he could ask for a softer response, but doing so would blur the line between father and sovereign. He calls Harry privately and struggles to find words that do not sound either cruel or weak. Harry waits for reassurance. Instead, Charles tells him he cannot protect him from consequences created by his own choice. The silence afterward is longer than either man expects. Harry then learns something that hurts even more. Anne personally declined to oppose the restriction, despite having enough influence to ask for leniency. She does not attack him publicly, and she does not add another punishment, but she refuses to shield him. To her, stepping in now would suggest that the court's ruling mattered less because the person involved was family. Anne goes further in one carefully documented instruction within the fictional palace record. She asks that the recovered decree be placed under the exact custodial procedure Elizabeth originally specified. Custodial procedure simply means the formal chain controlling where a sensitive document is stored, who may access it, and when it can be opened. By insisting on that process, she closes the very gap Harry once used. Night settles, and Harry assumes the message is final. Then his phone lights up. Anne has sent only a few words, asking him to meet her alone the following morning. No aides, no lawyers, no palace buffer, and no easy escape. The institutions had spoken with cold precision. The next meeting would be different, because this time there would be nothing between aunt and nephew except grief, anger, and the memory of the Queen they both believed they were protecting. The second meeting begins nothing like the first. Harry arrives without lawyers, aides, or prepared explanations. Anne is already waiting. For several seconds, neither speaks. Then he finally stops defending the legality of what he did, and tells her why he could not bring himself to surrender the decree. The answer does not absolve him. But for the first time, Anne understands that beneath the deception was something more complicated than rebellion. Harry tells her the decree contained wording he believed was meant to protect a family member from being quietly erased by palace convention after Elizabeth's death. Palace convention, in simple terms, means the unwritten customs and established practices that shape how royal matters are handled, even when no law spells them out. He feared those customs would swallow the Queen's private intention once the document disappeared into custody. To him, surrendering it felt less like following procedure and more like surrendering her meaning. Anne listens, but she does not soften immediately. She reminds Harry that interpretation and custody were never the same thing. He could have challenged how the decree was handled. He could have demanded review, requested legal advice, or asked for its meaning to be formally considered. What he could not do, she says, was secretly decide that his judgment outranked everyone else's responsibility. Harry finally admits what he had avoided saying aloud. He no longer trusted the palace process enough to believe Elizabeth's intention would survive untouched. Anne answers with painful precision. His greatest mistake, she tells him, was not distrusting an institution. It was deciding that nobody else who loved the Queen could be trusted either. Harry does not argue this time. He knows she is right. Harry then makes one final disclosure during their private, fictionalized conversation. He tells Anne he never altered the decree, copied it, sold it, or leaked its contents. He kept it untouched because he believed that one day he could force its meaning into a formal process where it could not be ignored. Anne accepts that he was not seeking money or spectacle. But she refuses to turn motive into innocence. The court, she tells him, was right to recover it. Anne rises before the conversation can become sentimental. She leaves Harry with one choice. The world can see a man still defending his pride, or a grandson finally accepting that love does not excuse what he did. Harry could not undo the concealment, but Anne had shown him the only path left, and by afternoon, he made a decision that changed the public meaning of the entire scandal. By midday, the story is no longer contained inside courtrooms and palace corridors. Britain wakes to a royal scandal framed in enormous type: the Queen's hidden decree, Harry's concealment, Anne's refusal to shield him. Yet the defining moment of the day is not one of fury. It is Harry stepping forward without attacking the palace, without blaming the court, and without attempting one final escape from responsibility. Harry knows the public argument has changed. Broadcasters lead with the fictional judgment, while palace correspondents explain that the dispute concerns legal custody, meaning the formal right and responsibility to hold a restricted royal document, rather than ownership of the monarchy itself. That distinction matters, because the scandal is no longer about whether he loved Elizabeth or believed he understood her wishes. It is about whether personal conviction could ever justify keeping a protected decree outside the system meant to preserve it. Buckingham Palace answers with restraint. In a fictional written statement, officials confirm that the decree has been recovered and secured according to the late Queen's original instructions. The palace does not attack Harry, and that silence carries its own weight. By refusing to inflame the moment, the institution leaves him with nowhere to hide behind another family war. Harry then gives a brief public statement. He accepts the ruling and admits that believing he had a moral reason did not give him the right to conceal the decree. His words are simple, but their impact is enormous. For the first time, he is not arguing intention against consequence. He is separating them. Anne watches the statement privately and feels something shift. She does not smile, and she does not treat the moment as victory, but relief breaks through. Harry has not been cleared. He has simply stopped running from the choice he made, and for her, that matters more than any defensive speech could have. Outside Buckingham Palace, the public mood crystallizes around one vivid moment. A late edition newspaper rises above the crowd, carrying the fictional front-page line, "Harry accepts Queen decree ruling." Nearby phones play his statement aloud, and conversation drops into an unusual silence. Charles makes one final decision. The king authorizes no retaliatory briefing, no counterattack, and no attempt to reshape the story. Harry's acceptance will stand on its own. That night, Anne receives a handwritten note from him containing only a few lines. The public argument had finally begun to cool, but the real verdict was never going to come from headlines. It would come from Anne, and from whether she believed Harry had finally understood what he had broken. There is no dramatic pardon, no sudden erasure of what happened. And that is precisely why the ending carries weight. In the final movement of this fictional royal story, Princess Anne reads Harry's handwritten note and understands that he is no longer asking her to say he was right. He is asking her to believe that he finally understands why he was wrong. After days of anger, shame, and public exposure, that distinction becomes everything. Harry's note leaves no room for excuses. He acknowledges that the decree belonged in authorized custody, that he knowingly prevented its transfer, and that his personal interpretation of the Queen's wishes never gave him authority to overrule the process. Authorized custody, in simple terms, is the formal system deciding who may hold, protect, and control access to sensitive royal material. The recovered decree is now sealed exactly as Elizabeth intended, finally closing the institutional wound that started the crisis. Anne reads every line alone. She folds the note once, and keeps it instead of destroying it, a quiet choice that says more than forgiveness ever could. She remains disappointed in Harry, but she has not rejected him as family. When they speak privately one final time in this dramatized account, he admits he expected anger. Anne tells him anger was never the worst part. The deepest wound was realizing he had treated duty and love as enemies when Elizabeth spent her life trying to hold both together. Harry does not defend himself. That changes everything. Anne does not excuse the concealment, challenge the ruling, or ask the palace to rewrite what happened. Instead, she tells him that accepting consequences is the first honorable thing he has done since taking the decree. The words hurt, but they also give him something he has not had since the scandal began. A path forward that does not depend on proving everyone else wrong. Charles later learns through a private family account that the conversation ended without speeches or dramatic forgiveness, only a restrained embrace between aunt and nephew. The king understands what that means. The wound has not vanished, but it has stopped deepening. Harry loses the argument that good motives justified bad choices. Yet he regains the possibility of trust because he finally accepts that duty collapses when individuals privately choose which obligations deserve obedience. Anne's devastation was never about defeating him. It came from watching someone she loved mistake devotion for permission, and that becomes the final verdict. The decree is back where the Queen intended it to be. Harry has accepted responsibility. Anne has protected Elizabeth's memory without abandoning her nephew. The monarchy emerges bruised but clearer. Love can explain a mistake, and forgiveness can soften its consequences, but neither can erase responsibility. There is no next battle to tease, and no hidden escape waiting behind the palace doors. Harry finally understands what Anne had been trying to tell him from the beginning. Love may soften the consequences of betrayal, but it can never make the betrayal lawful. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.